If you've ever wondered why your relaxing watercolor hobby doesn't feel quite so relaxing, this video is for you. Maybe you picked up painting expecting those peaceful, meditative moments that people talk about, but sometimes you sit down to paint and walk away feeling more frustrated than when you started. Or maybe you even abandon your painting altogether, like I seem to have done with this little flower journal project that I started an awfully long time ago, apparently. Let's paint a page in that journal together and chat about how to find the kind of creative calm you're looking for. So often we choose a hobby like watercolor painting specifically for those relaxation benefits. We're looking for that peaceful wind down after a busy day, something that's going to help us slow down and reconnect with ourselves. And watercolor seems the perfect choice for that, doesn't it? There's something genuinely magical about what those pigments do on the page, the way they flow and blend, those beautiful organic effects that happen when you let the paint just do what it wants on the paper. Clearly, it feels like it should be the most naturally meditative art form. However, there is also that school of thought that says that watercolor is the hardest medium to master. When you think about that, it does create quite a tension, doesn't it? On one hand, we're drawn to watercolor because we want that relaxation, that sense of letting go and flow. But on the other hand, we're working with a medium that can be genuinely tricky, one that requires a certain level of technical understanding to make the paint cooperate with what we're trying to do. So we find ourselves caught in the space between wanting to relax and enjoy the process and needing enough technical proficiency to make the painting work. It can be tough to find the balance between having sufficient proficiency to make the painting enjoyable and maintaining enough freedom to truly relax and play without getting too caught up in how everything turns out. And this brings us right back to that old idea of prioritizing the process over the product, which sounds wonderful in theory, but can be much harder to actually live by when you're sitting there with the brush in your hand. I think what helps is to give ourselves a bit of permission to paint badly. Now, I hate to use that word badly. I never like to say that. I prefer to say, let's give ourselves permission to just let the painting turn out how it will and be okay with that. The thing is, good and bad are just relative, and what they're relative to is your own expectation. So if we can change those expectations, we will change the whole outcome. And we need never forget, at the end of the day, it's just a piece of paper. We can always throw it away and paint another one. I know, sometimes that's easier said than done, especially when we're trying to embrace the beginner mindset. There's something about being a beginner that requires a particular kind of courage, the courage to not know what you're doing and be okay with that. Which brings me back to this little flower journal that I'm working on in this playlist series. Because it seems like wanting to create this perfect little journal of watercolor flowers is actually depriving me of the opportunity to just enjoy painting and paint some not so great ones. You know, the ones where I might actually learn something new or discover a happy accident. Or not, it's all good. In fact, I think I'd sort of planned for potential failure from the very beginning. I chose to not bind the journal before I painted it, just in case some of the pages didn't turn out very well, and that would allow me to leave them out if need be. I was essentially setting myself up to fail. It's something I talked about in the last video, and I'll see if Editing Kerry can pop the link to that up in the cards. But here's the thing, that system didn't really work anyway, because in the book I'm creating, each sheet of paper is actually going to be 4 pages in the finished sketchbook. So in reality, I would have to sacrifice 3 more paintings if there was one that I really wanted to leave out. So that whole safety net I'd created for myself was actually more harmful than helpful. But I think even this is something else that a little creative practice gets to teach you. It's very useful to start learning how you work best, figuring out what it is that's going to encourage you and what's going to put you off completely. It's about working with your personality. Some people thrive on working with loose sheets. There's something liberating about knowing that each piece stands alone. There's no pressure to maintain any sort of consistency like there is across a sketchbook, perhaps. But other people prefer the contained, safe feeling of a sketchbook, where everything lives together and tells part of a bigger story. I guess the question is, can you change your mindset about the sketchbook and view it less as a precious thing and more as a private practice space? Because that's really what it should be, isn't it? A place where you can experiment and play and not worry too much about the outcome. I think size is another consideration that we don't often take into account. Sometimes a big page feels a bit daunting. All that white space staring back at you, waiting for you to fill it with something amazing. Other times, a little tiny page can feel far too limiting and like you just don't have enough space. Again, this just comes back to knowing yourself and being ready for whatever you feel like on a particular day. Of course, there is another challenge, the agony of choice. Too many decisions to make can really suck the fun out of painting and even stop you painting altogether. So there's a balance to strike between giving yourself enough options to keep things interesting, but not overwhelming yourself with possibility. Actually, if working smaller sounds appealing to you, I have come across these little gummed pads. I really quite enjoy the square size, the square format, and they come in some quite small sizes, and you can even get some not in a gummed pad, but actually as pre-cut cards with rounded edges that even come in a sweet little presentation box. I think they're perfect for a few minutes of play when you want to unwind, and they don't feel too much like you're wasting a whole lot of expensive paper. I'm actually using little cards like this in a course that I'm working on that combines hand lettering with learning a few watercolor techniques on tiny little cards like this to create your own affirmation deck or a deck of quotations, something like that. It also includes other things like meditation and breathing practices that you can add to your painting practice to give yourself the full relaxing experience. The course isn't quite finished yet, but let me know in the comments if that's something that sounds interesting to you. If finding our creative calm is what painting is all about, then maybe we should broaden our idea of the creative process. Sometimes the most relaxing part of the painting isn't even the painting itself. Sometimes it's just about setting up your art space. There is something deeply satisfying about arranging your brushes, setting up your palette, and finding that glorious textured paper. And sometimes, quite honestly, if you're having a really bad day, just opening up the palette and having a look at those beautiful colors is enough to cheer you up just a tiny bit. There is something so hopeful about them. The paints sit there with their beautiful colors, just waiting for you to be ready to play with them. And really, where else in everyday life does that sort of thing happen? It's not often that we have something that will just wait for us with no judgment, without pressure, until we're perfectly ready. And the truth is, we all have good days and bad days with our creative practice. Some days the paint flows beautifully and everything feels effortless. Other days it's like the paint has a mind of its own and refuses to cooperate. Both experiences are perfectly valid and normal. Maybe your creative calm isn't the traditional meditative state at all. Maybe it's in focused concentration, or the problem solving, or the simple act of making something with your own two hands. Maybe it's in the planning stage, or even in the cleaning up afterwards, when you're reflecting on what you've learned and created. So let's expand our definition of what creative peace looks like. Instead of expecting every painting session to feel like meditation, what if we just allow ourselves to have whatever experience we have in the moment? Engagement and focus feel very different from the quiet calm we associate with meditation, but they can be just as valuable. It's rather wonderful to have some painting sessions that are more about learning than about relaxing. We can absolutely have both. We just don't necessarily have to have them both at the same time. And maybe your creative practice energizes you rather than mellows you out. It all works. The important thing is giving yourself permission to work with your personality rather than fighting against it. It's really about not putting too much pressure on yourself when you create. I talked all about that in a separate video. It covers all the different ways that we sabotage our own creative projects, sometimes before we even start. You might even find yourself recognizing patterns you didn't even know you had, and picking up a few practical tips on how to get back to painting. I've popped it up on the screen so you can watch that one next. Happy painting!